Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John and thank you very much for joining me for another exciting episode of Secrets of the Motorway. This week it's a big one. We're doing the A1M. The A1M is a series of 4 motorway sections that sits on the route of the A1. Effectively, they're upgraded parts of the A1. It's probably a lot easier if I just show you this map that I stole from Wikipedia. Today we'll be starting at South Mimms Services, which sits on Bignell's Corner, an interchange where the M25 and the A1M meet. From here we'll be heading north up our first section of the A1M, and that runs from here at South Mimms up to Stopfold in Hertfordshire. But our first stop is not even half a mile up the road, where we've come to look at the site of the South Mimms Castle. From the motorway, it looks like a field with some woods, so you'd never know about the secret past that this unassuming patch of land has had. The castle is believed to have been built during a time of civil war in 1141. It only lasted a couple of years before it was destroyed. It's certainly very likely that the site was occupied thereafter, however, the castle was never rebuilt. Considering how long the site has been here, it was only first identified in 1918, and excavations of the site didn't occur until much later in the 1960s. We're going to jump back on the A1M now and start heading to our next stop, which is also something rather old. So yes, sticking with old things, and just off junction 6 of the A1M at Welwyn is where we find the Welwyn Roman baths. The Roman baths were discovered in the 1960s and dug out over a period of 10 years. When they'd finished, the Ministry of Transport came along and said, yeah, nice work lads, we're going to stick the A1M right on the top of it. A compromise was found where the Roman baths would be encased within a steel vault and the motorway built across the top. The now preserved remains sit 9 metres below the A1M and is accessed via a small tunnel. Our next stops sit between junctions 13 and 17. This is the Alcanbridge to Peterborough stretch of the A1M, and it's only about 12 miles long. And what we're perhaps wondering at this point is, why hasn't the A1 all been upgraded to the A1M rather than just certain sections? The A1M has always struggled when it comes to planning and construction. In 1990, the Transport Secretary said that eventually the entire A1 would be upgraded to motorway standards. So not long after, they got on with things and upgraded the A1 on that Alcanbridge to Peterborough stretch. But shortly after this, somebody changed their minds and they pulled the plug and funding for any future A1M upgrades. The end result is a project that was never finished, and in the case of the Alcanbridge to Peterborough section, we're left with a 12-mile stretch of motorway that doesn't serve any purpose at all. What makes it a little bit more odd is that it's a full 4-lane motorway, so it's pretty much as good as you're going to get for a 12-mile section. Makes no sense at all. At junction 15 for Sawtree, we're going to take a little bit of a detour. Right next to the A1M on the B1090 lies the now disused Sawtree Petroleum Storage Depot. It was part of the government pipeline and storage system. This 1,600-mile network of pipelines connected the oil refineries on the coast with the oil storage depots inland, like the one we see here at Sawtree. At the next junction along, junction 16, is where we find the site of the Norman Cross Prison. It was constructed in 1797 and was the first prisoner of war camp in the world. On average, the prison population was around 5,500, many of whom would arrive on a boat at Portsmouth and be forced to march all the way to the prison. Just get a taxi. I don't think life would have been all that pleasant at the prison, and in 1914 this memorial was put in place to honour the 1,700 prisoners who died here. The memorial was actually relocated because when the A1M came along, it was sort of in the way, so it's now been moved just up the road off the A15. The A1M stops just after Peterborough, and we won't see it again for another 70 miles, where we'll pick up the A1M just south of Harworth. We're very much up north now, and naturally there's a colliery. Between junctions 34 and 35 is what's left of the Harworth Colliery. This colliery opened in 1913 before being considered for closure in 2002. At this time they considered their options in order to keep the mine open, but to do so would have cost £50 million worth of investment, and that's a price tag that nobody was prepared to pay. The site was mothballed in 2006, but it did nearly reopen in 2008 with the intention of mining the remaining coal. This never happened, and the site began its demolition process in 2016. Now, as I'm sure you know, guys, old collieries are a little bit of me all day long, so I insisted that we came and had a look around. Unfortunately, we've just found piles of rubble, and as you can see behind me, this is remains of an old railway that the A1M crosses right over. It was installed in 1924 to serve the colliery specifically, but obviously no trains have been down here for an awfully long time. We're just coming up to Doncaster now, and the section known as the Doncaster Bypass is the oldest section of the A1M, which opened in 1961. Keep an eye out to your right as you head up the A1M between junctions 36 and 37. There's a pair of old railway bridges that cross over the River Don. One of them is still an active line and makes up the railway version of the Doncaster Bypass. The other is very much abandoned and now makes up part of the Trans-Pennine Trail, which is a thing for walkists and cyclists and things I don't really understand. A short distance from the River Don up the A1M is where you'll find the Melton Road depot. Today this is a National Highways depot, but was originally supposed to be a service station called Sprotborough. It was thought that because the M18 and the M1 fed a lot of traffic into this area, an additional service station would be needed. However, at the time, it wasn't really given the highest priority because they were building the Doncaster Bypass and needed a maintenance depot more so than a service station. So they built the maintenance depot, but also added a set of slip roads to join it to the A1M, allowing the site to be converted to a service station later on. When the facility had been completed, they decided that the site was now too small for a service station and they changed their mind. It was thought that with the A1 nearby, you'd be able to find a service station there instead, so the whole plan was abandoned. The A1M drops back to being the A1 from junction 38 right up to Fairbridge, where the M62 meets the A1. Fairbridge is known for its large coal-fired power plants, which have operated there since the mid-1920s. There were 3 stations, A, B and C, with the latter being built in 1966. Along with its construction came the cooling towers, which stood at over 100 metres high, and you'd spot these a mile off when travelling up the A1M or the M62. They've sort of become a bit of a landmark. Sadly, the last of these cooling towers were demolished earlier this year, and the site closed to be replaced with a waste-to-energy power plant rather than a coal-fired one. Who remembers Little Chef restaurants? A fabulous chain of dirt-cheap restaurants serving all of your greasy favourites. And who didn't love an Olympic breakfast in the mid-90s? They've all closed down now, sadly, but dotted around are various abandoned Little Chef restaurants to be found, and certainly the A1M has its fair share. One such example can be found 20 seconds off junction 44 on the A64. The Bramham branch of Little Chef opened in 1980 alongside a petrol station, but it wasn't the only Little Chef in the area. There were also restaurants to be found at Nut Hill and Aberford services, all of which are a mere few minutes from here. And then the A1M upgrades came along, which resulted in Aberford services being completely demolished, and Nut Hill was completely bypassed by the motorway and access was made incredibly difficult. The Nut Hill branch closed in 1999 as a result of the poor trade that they were getting, and you'd think with Bramham Little Chef being the only one in the area, they'd see a roaring trade. Sadly, that wasn't the case, because access to this branch was made incredibly difficult as a result of the motorway upgrades as well. The only way you can get to it is by joining the eastbound A64 towards Tadcaster, and the entrance now lies off a slip road. Naturally, the number of customers began to drop off, and by 2002 it was all over for this branch of Little Chef, and the petrol station followed shortly after. Once you finish checking out the Little Chef, just up the road, right on junction 44 of the A1M, is this abandoned farm. Honestly, if I see an abandoned building, I'm on it like Jago Hazard to an underground line. This is one of those situations where I couldn't quite find out why it's been left like this. The internet, and indeed the signage around this site, would suggest that it was or is owned by Leeds University. But before this, it was used as a residence, so the story's quite unclear. What do you reckon, guys? Any ideas? From one abandoned structure to another. Well, sort of. At junction 47, there's an abandoned golf course to be found. Flaxbee Park Golf and Country Club opened in 2004. Some years later, the owners reported that it wasn't really as profitable as they would have liked, and the decision to close came in 2015. The vast area of land has now been earmarked for a housing development, which on this occasion probably makes sense given its close proximity to the motorway. The developers have been quite smart with this one. They've also inquired about purchasing the nearby disused Goldsborough railway station. The plan therefore is quite simple: build 2,000 houses, put a railway station in, job's a good un. Junction 49 is where the A168 meets the A1M. Nothing unusual there other than, okay, a slightly odd junction design, but that's okay. Here is where we find a secret motorway that, if you look on any map, doesn't exist. As you leave the A1M heading northbound onto the A168, keep an eye out for the road signs, and you'll notice that they're titled A168, but they're blue. And we all know that blue signs means motorway. The theme continues for about a mile or so until you reach the "this is now the end of the motorway" sign. Until that point though, the road is classified as a motorway, but as I said, it isn't displayed like that on any map. Junction 50 is also known as the Bowlersby Interchange, and it's here we find what appears to be a short section of abandoned road. When we think of building motorways, we assume that it was all done in the 60s and the 70s, and that was that. It's actually surprising how long some upgrades can take sometimes, and the A1M is the perfect example of that. It wasn't until 2012 that the A1 was finally upgraded here at Junction 50. They added additional lanes and it became a proper designated motorway. As a result, the junction here needed a complete redesign, with roundabouts being added and the A61 being shifted to a new alignment to suit those roundabouts. Following the A61's realignment, they left this short stretch of abandoned road behind. The section of upgrades on the A1M between junctions 51 and 56 was only completed in 2018, and like we've just seen, often involved changing the junction layouts, or in this case, installing a new junction altogether. Here's a little before and after using satellite images, which shows where junction 52 has been added. In 2019, service station operator Roadchef announced that they were going to build a new service station at junction 52 at a cost of £57 million. With sections of the A1M only being completed fairly recently, we can expect a few more service stations to pop up over the coming years. Welcome Break are looking at a site 20 miles from here at Kirby Hill, and Roadchef are also looking at a site south of us at Selby. As we know, the A1M is really just a bunch of motorway sections, and the randomised opening of these sections has caused a bit of a problem when it comes to the motorway junction numbers. If you're looking for junction 54 or 55, where are the motorway junctions? Find the motorway junctions. You're going to struggle because they don't exist. Scotch Corner is at junction 53 and the next one along is number 56. This problem has occurred because the A1M section north of junction 56 was built in the 1960s, whereas the A1M south of that is a lot more modern and came much later. When they numbered the 60s built A1M, they had other intentions which involved constructing more junctions, so it all made sense back then. Of course, things have changed over the years and the original plans and ideas haven't been followed at all. Between junction 60 and 61, you'll find Drizzlington Quarry, a very much still in use quarry that extracts various aggregates and has been doing so for over 55 years. The A1M dissects the quarry in half and you pass right through it, but I don't think you get much of a view from the A1M, so I thought I'd change that. Right next to the quarry is the Drizzlington National Nature Reserve, and it's home to a variety of rare insects and grasses. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the quarrying next door has upset certain areas of the site, and the result of that is that rare vegetation no longer grows in certain areas. Whilst the A1M does have two more junctions, it's at junction 62 where we find our journey's end. But there's one more thing that we're going to look at. For this you're going to need to come off the A1M and take a little bit of a walk, but I think it's going to be worth it. Night is quickly drawing in, so we're going to have to be fairly quick. If, like me, you spend absolutely hours on Google Earth perusing the various satellite images that you can get, around this area you might notice what is clearly an old railway. If we follow that along for a little bit into the trees, eventually we'll reach the Belmont Railway Viaduct. This impressive brick and stone structure was built in 1856 for the North Eastern Railway. It's got 8 arches, stands at 130 feet high and runs at 700 foot in length. Until 1964, where the railway saw closure, it used to run services between Sunderland and Durham. Now it lays disused and abandoned, creating nothing but a picturesque scene of a viaduct across a river. I don't mind heights as such, but when you're 130 foot high with absolutely no railings, it's slightly disconcerting. Anyway, that's all we've got time for this week, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked the video. If you did, of course, there's a button specifically for that. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John. You've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another episode of Secrets of the Motorway. Until then, take care. Bye-bye now.